Hello, I just sent out the latest version of my new manuscript on the community stuff I'm learning and started getting a little bit of feedback. So I wanted to walk through how I think about receiving beta reader feedback, how I use that to feedback into the book design process, and, also to respond to a couple specific comments that, I think there are interesting takeaways from. So this is the manuscript over here with readers, highlights, and comments, and then over here is my dashboard. So the first things I notice when I look at this is that there's 81 reactions in the first chapter, and then it drops down 20, 24, 33, 16. So this doesn't necessarily make me immediately panic, but I'm curious what the drop off is. A good sign is that some people are reading straight through in one session, which is always really nice. Some people less so, right? But that's fine. When you detect people, when you see them reading all the way through, it's a pretty decent sign that they're in your ideal customer or reader segment, or they're doing you a real nice favor. Whereas other people, often, if they leave right at the beginning, it's because they're sort of like, okay, I get it. It's just not quite for me. So, that's totally fine. The comments that I wanted to talk through, let me go to Bookflow. You can see here, these are like, I loved it, it was useful, miscellaneous comments, etc. Some stuff I look for, here it's a case where I just describe myself poorly. It's nice to figure out what really resonates, like nice, strong, like, yeah. This gets me excited to read more. Stuff like this, I really like to see. That's kind of working. The usefuls are the ones that I pay the most attention to in terms of, well, usefuls, confusing, slows, because those are kind of the big substantial things. And this is a nice, someone chipped in a metaphor or a comparison. So that's cool. You're like, I might use that. A lot of the stuff that ends up in my book, it's from the words or from the feedback or the interpretation of beta readers. So here's a case, a funny little writing example, where as the writer, it's like, I felt myself writing the phrase outcome-oriented community a million times, and I thought the readers would be getting as annoyed reading it as I was of typing it. But you can see this person's like saying, hey, I've already forgotten what this stands for. Also here, I had assumed this is about reader segmentation. I'd assumed that the readers who were interested in outcome-oriented communities would also be very familiar, that they would come from the startup world, and so that they would be familiar with startup abbreviations, which is actually, turns out, not the case. Two different people said, hey, I don't know what this is. I don't know these things. So it means that my member segmentation is a lot broader than I thought it was, or my reader segmentation, and that this topic appeals to people outside of the startup world. Here, it's always great when multiple people highlight the same thing. That's a case where they said they loved this particular sentence. So for whatever reason, that phrasing or that point is resonating. This serves a couple of purposes for me. Often the things that lots of people say they love will make an appearance in the marketing materials somewhere, whether it's on the back cover of the book, the Amazon page. Sometimes I promote them from being a little aside to being something bigger, like a section title or a concept. Sometimes I would turn this into like a proper noun or a message that gets repeated because I know that that message resonates. And if it resonates, then people will talk about that and remember it and be able to act on it. It's like a little brainworm. Here's another example, 1, 2, 3, 4 different people, all kind of flagged up the same aside. And you can see I had it in parentheticals, but this is clearly a much more important or compelling point than I thought it was. So I want to be careful not to change this sentence during editing because it's clearly resonating and I might promote it. What else? Oh, this was an interesting one where, again, it was a little parenthetical aside. Whereas the previous parenthetical, people said, like, I love this. This is working really well. With this one, I had a bunch of different people. I had the same parenthetical in earlier versions of this manuscript, so I've seen this across multiple versions. But they basically said, this sounds intriguing, but I don't get it. You got to tell me more. And so this is a case where I might actually expand this parenthetical into its own little mini section with way more information because it's not as clear as I thought it would be. You'll notice the colors are changing. So this beginning part is kind of introductory, context setting, manifesto. So it's a lot of people saying, I love this, but it's not exactly useful. As we start getting into core content, which hopefully doesn't take too long, things start getting marked out as useful. this would be on my mind when I'm thinking about front loading the value, because you want to get people to useful stuff as early as possible. The fact that like they didn't find it that slow or that confusing, a few people did, but not so much, and they were enjoying the tone, like the tone was resonating. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but also aspirational. So I'm like, okay, maybe they'll bear with me through the introductory section, but I still might go back to these early sections and look for ways to shorten them and try to get to more of the useful stuff earlier. So this is a cool one, Knowing Seal. All these names are random, obviously, but people usually tell me who they are and if they want to take credit. So I know that Knowing Seal also read an earlier version of the manuscript. And so here this reader is comparing this chapter's current manifestation to the previous version. He's saying like, hey, the value here is a lot more obvious. So, that's just a nice thing to hear. I don't always need to have that explicitly called out, because you can go back to the previous versions and kind of compare the quantitative metrics, but it never hurts to be told. There was one in particular that I wanted to get to. So this was such an interesting comment for me, and thank you so much. Yeah, I know who left this, and I'll send you a personal thank you note. But it's super interesting for multiple reasons. So the reader said, I love this, and then in the comments said, I agree with this, but then he said, I'm also in your community, and you don't do this, or you haven't accomplished this yet. And does this mean it's hard to do? Does it mean you've decided you don't care? Like, what does this mean? Such an awesome comment. So one, I love that you're calling BS on me, because you got to keep me honest. And two, there's multiple parts going on here. The type of book that I'm trying to write here is I'm not writing about something I know. I'm writing about something I'm trying to learn. So there's a lot of cases where as I figure stuff out, it still takes me a few months to catch up on the implementation of it. And I need to be really clear about that throughout the book, that it's like, hey, this is my current understanding and my aspiration. This is what I'm heading toward, more so than a representation of where I'm already at. And for me to feel good about putting this out there, and for my readers to feel good about reading it, I think I mentioned it in the intro, but that's clearly not enough. It's something I need to reiterate throughout. And a couple of the other places where I mention my shortcomings and how I'm not quite there yet, get a really positive response from people. And they go, oh yeah, I get it. It's cool to see you're on this journey too. So really useful in that regard. Really useful in the sense that I know that all of this user's feedback is going to be really high quality, because if he's willing to call bullshit on me here, then probably it's not all just fluff. And then also it shows me something that is even more subtle, which is what I was trying to say didn't come across. And this is such an important point, and it's so amazing through this comment to have realized that because no proofreader or reviewer or checker would ever identify this issue, because it's so inside the reader's brain. But it comes out through the beta reading. What else? This book is half finished, well, less than half finished. So what I did is down at the end, I left a big proposed outline, like a proposed table of contents of the stuff I haven't finished yet. And what was so cool to see, this was totally organic. I didn't ask people to do it, but people started highlighting individual proposed sections or chapters that were particularly desirable or interesting to them. And so as a happy side effect of this, I kind of got a prioritized list of which topics I should do next. And then I also added a gentle mention of kind of upsell or author platform. I said, hey, if you want to follow along, you can give me your email address here, or, I might even do a paid early access thing. And 2 or 3 people have already said like, yeah, I want that. Let's go. So even though this book doesn't have a website, it doesn't have a mailing list, it doesn't have a platform, by just putting that option into the manuscript. So that's all a lot of stuff, but that's kind of how I think about the beta reading feedback and what it means to me. And sometimes I go through person by person, because sometimes you realize that one person has a particular set of experiences or worldview or context, and you really want to read through all of the feedback through their lens. But usually I just go through chapter by chapter. Anyway, that's how I deal with it. That's how I use it. And it's so amazing to me that still so many authors and so many publishers aren't doing this stuff. I can't imagine writing a book without some sort of data. You can do it with Google Docs. However you want to do it, like, you got to get that data. There's so much in there, and it's so helpful in identifying the issues, identifying the strengths, and ending up with something you're really proud of.